Welcome to our second candidate conversation for Informed Decisions 2020. Each major election year, the Hinckley Institute of Politics and Gardner Policy Institute collaborate on Informed Decisions, an effort to educate Utah voters on critical policy issues and to better acquaint them with competitive candidates from key races throughout the state. They're thrilled to also collaborate with the University of Utah Alumni Association. For today's candidate conversation, we are joined by two of the candidates for Utah Governor, Republican nominee Lieutenant Governor Spencer Cox and Democratic nominee Chris Peterson. Spencer Cox is Utah's current Lieutenant Governor. Cox has had a successful career in both the public and private sectors, practicing law with private firm Fabian Clendenim, managing his family's telecommunications company, Centricom, and serving as a city councilman, mayor, county commissioner, and state representative in San Pete County. Chris Peterson is a professor of business law at the University of Utah with a focus on consumer protection. Peterson has had a long, successful career working with various government agencies, including the Department of Defense and the Federal Consumer Finance Protection Bureau. Peterson is a published author and a revered advocate for consumer protections. We would like to thank our streaming sponsor, AARP Utah, and media sponsor, KCPW, to ensure these candidate conversations are live, streamed, recorded, and broadcasted for the greater community. And with that, I'll turn the time over to Jason, our moderator.
All right, Ann, thank you for the introduction, and thank you all for joining us today as we present to you Informed Decisions 2020. As many of you who watch the program and follow the Hinckley Institute know, we partner with the Gardner Policy Institute every major election cycle to bring you these candidate forums where we get to know the candidates personally. We talk to them about the topics that are important to them, but more importantly, the topics that are important to Utahns. We spend time at the Gardner Policy Institute talking to people throughout the state to see what issues are most important to them. And we present this to you today so you can get to know these two candidates for governor for the state of Utah. This is a very big race. And we had a coin toss yesterday to see who would go first. And the result of that is that Chris Peterson, Democratic candidate for governor for the state of Utah, will be joining us first. Chris, thank you for being with us.
Well, thank you, Jason, and thank you to the Hinckley Institute of Politics and AARP and the Gardner Policy Institute and also KCPW for sponsoring this. It's important for the public to get to know about the candidates, and it's an honor to be with you today.
Well, I want to get to know you a little bit. Just for those that are watching and those that you've been trying to reach out to during this very difficult campaign time, tell us a little more about you, and why you decided to run for this race.
Well, sure. Jason, my great-great-grandfather led a wagon train of 1,500 pioneers in 1847. He went on to become the public school superintendent for Deseret Territory. He became a big faith leader. He was the Speaker of the House of Representatives as a Democrat for 5 or 6 terms. He was also one of the first chairmen of Zions Bank. I don't know where the Zions Bank money went because I was raised in a single-parent household with a disabled mom and very, very limited income in West Valley City. And I from early on decided that I was going to work hard and try to find a life that was meaningful and served others, believe in public service and lifting people up and making the world a better place. And did that in the federal government and as a teacher. Worked at the United States Department of Defense, advising the Department of Defense on how to protect military service members from predatory loans, and also worked in the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, helping set up law enforcement cases to make sure that if banks or other financial institutions treated their customers unfairly, that they had to pay the consequences. And we returned over about $12 billion in refunds and restitution to Americans all across the country. I'm in this race because I want to make a difference for ordinary working Utahns. I want to listen to the public and do their bidding. I think that sometimes when you have a one-party government, it's too easy for elected officials to start to cater to the interests of privileged elites and party insiders and lobbyists that are working behind the scenes. I'm not going to do that. I'm going to listen to ordinary working voters across the state and try to make a difference in their daily lives.
I thought as I was getting ready for this, Chris, we've been preparing for the vice presidential debate, and some materials went out. And one of the interesting facts people note about you is apparently you are an expert pie maker. Is that true?
Well, I don't know about an expert. I do like to bake pies, and I like pie. And I guess I've always tried to make some of my first year law students pies, and so I think that's kind of taken on some, maybe a little more of note than it deserves. And this year it's a real tragedy. I'm not going to be able to do that because it's not safe with the coronavirus to have 100 students over to my house with their families and whatnot to eat pie. But I do, look, I try to be a good mentor to my students, and that's really what this is about. And it's that same sense of public service and compassion that animates the reason why I'm running for governor. It's not about pie. It's about doing the right thing for people, treating them with compassion, honoring the dignity of their work, and making a difference in this world.
Thank you for that. I want to jump into these big issues that we've identified. Some of them are just readily apparent. Of course, they're the issues on the top of minds for all Utahns. And you mentioned that first when it comes to COVID-19. Let's talk about the impacts on the state of Utah, but particularly when you think of this role as governor. What do you think the governor should be doing when they're faced with a global pandemic like this and the impacts on Utahns in particular?
First, we need the public to understand how serious this disease is. There's been some misinformation at the federal level. Initially, the president of the United States said that it would go away on its own, that it's different than flu. That's just not true. Now, 200,000 Americans have died. That's more Americans than perished in the First World War. People all operations, and it's not just the number of people who are dying. It also can cause serious long-term lung scarring, kidney damage, heart damage in some instances. I think that many of them lingering effects long afterwards. So what should we be doing here at the state in Utah? We got to recognize it's serious. I've called for a statewide mask mandate. I know that's not popular in some circles, but I believe it's critical to keep people safe in this state. The science is irrefutable now that if we don't put masks on, that we're putting others, not just ourselves, but others at risk. And I think that it's more important to do that right now than ever, because in the past week, we've seen skyrocketing cases. And that's going to we're going to see a lag time where hospitalization is going to increase, and then there's going to be a number of people who are going to die from this in the coming weeks. We've got to contain the virus, and not just in Salt Lake, not even just in Utah County, across the state. We now are among the very highest rates of infection in the United States, and also the United States is worse off than nearly every other industrialized country in the world. And it's not just about masks. It's also, we need to decrease the testing time, processing times to no more than 24 hours. Many of the coronavirus tests are still taking days or even a week to get processed. That's not good enough, because people need to know right away whether or not they can go back to school or work. We also, I think, should triple or even quadruple the number of contact tracers that are available to track down people who may have been exposed to the disease and make sure that they're getting safely and humanely quarantined and identify whether or not they themselves have contracted the virus. Last, we've got to do a better job getting protective equipment and the best available resources and technology distributed across the state. 7 months into this pandemic, it's still not possible for many people to purchase N95 respirator masks, which are not expensive. They only cost about $1. We need to get those top quality protective services available. And here in the state of Utah, we've had some real struggles with that. We wasted a bunch of money on a cell phone app that doesn't seem to be working. And we've also closed down some of our low-income health clinics over a relatively modest budget shortfall that really could be doing a lot to try to take care of some of the most vulnerable people. So we need to get focused and take care of this virus so we can get our economy back on track.
There are a couple threads in there that I would love to explore with you, Chris. One is on this mask mandate. I want to put this into perspective. The state of Utah is now above 850 cases a day as our 7-day rolling average. And Governor Herbert yesterday had a statement, a press conference where he talked about it. He left some of these issues to local control. So I'm kind of curious about your opinion about that. You said you would put a mask mandate in effect. What is the right balance for a governor in your mind, where they're overseeing the entire state, but you want to leave some decisions? Just talk about what that might be, or where that line is when it comes to those local elected officials.
Yeah, that's a great question, Jason. I believe that generally speaking, we should defer to local authority, and that the state government should be a respectful partner in its relationship with local governments. Where struggling or may not have resources they need. That type of a situation. Here, we have a natural disaster that's ongoing. And I believe, given the severity of that crisis and given the resources that we have in the State Department of Health, that it's appropriate for us to take a bit more direct action to protect the health and safety and the welfare of our citizens. You know, just bear in mind, we have a state highway patrol that works all the way across the state in our highways. Right now, we have a public health emergency. More people have died in the state of Utah than all of our traffic accidents combined. It's appropriate in an emergency for the government to, the governor's office to engage in pretty direct action to take care of people and prevent the contagion of this dangerous disease.
Right, a little bit, and there at the very first part of that response there, we had a little bit of technical difficulty in hearing you just a little bit. So I want to make sure that we hear all of those parts. So I'll go back to those if we need to. But when you look at the role of the governor and a county commissioner comes to you and says, we don't want to change the color, or we don't want to put a mask mandate into place, what would you say should happen there? What would you do as the governor to try to answer that?
Yeah, so apologies for the technical details. I know that with everybody's wireless and it's a difficult time to try and keep each other safe. We're all becoming mini TV studios.
True.
But look, to try to answer the question, generally speaking, my philosophy is to work with respect and as a team with local governments and defer to them whenever possible. But there are some situations where, such as natural disasters and emergencies, where it's appropriate for the governor's office to take direct steps to try to protect the health and safety and welfare of our citizens. So I believe it's critical for this in this dangerous time, while there's an epidemic on, for masks to be worn statewide temporarily with some reasonable exceptions. No one's suggesting that if you're a farmer or a rancher out in the middle of 30 acres with no one around you that you have to have a mask on. But you know, I do believe that it's important as a matter of public safety for the governor's office to lead directly to try to get our economy back on track and to protect the safety of our citizens.
Okay, I want to get to, it's a poll that we just did recently, the Hinckley Institute of Politics that we did with the Deseret News, and we asked Utahns what the two top priorities were for them, for the governor. When they start talking about you, for example, what are the two things they care about the most? And there are two. One we just got to with COVID-19, but it's its partner, the thing it's completely connected to, and that is the economy. As the governor for the state of Utah, tell us what your plan is to get us through not just what's happened this pandemic and the correlating problem with our economy, but making sure we're poised for the future as a recovery.
Great question. It's obviously one of my top priorities, along with the public. First off, we've got to get the economy and healthy people. Folks out there are afraid of that lung scarring, the heart disease. They don't want to die. So they're not going to restaurants in the same numbers. They're not going to theaters. They're not going to retailers and spending money. And that's depressing our economy. We need Utahns to be ready to get back to work and get out there and do the kinds of economic activities that make our economy strong. And for that, we've got to get the virus under control. That's why the Chamber of Commerce has been with me on my approach to the coronavirus as opposed to the current administration's. But that being said, beyond the coronavirus, we are going to emerge from this at some point. I think some of the things we can do to try to get there quickly, I think we should be tapping our rainy day fund to try to get some spending out there to provide support to tenants who may be facing eviction and also landlords. We're already doing some of that. I think we should be doing more. I also think that we should be bonding with rock bottom interest rates right now. It's very, borrowing is very inexpensive right now. We should be bonding to promote shovel ready infrastructure projects around the state. One that I'll mention in particular, I believe that we need to be spurring a broadband all across the state, including especially in rural areas of Utah. The digital commerce of the future requires internet connections that are better than the ones that you and I are on right now, where we get interrupted. We need to be able to do business across the state without these interruptions, because digital commerce is going to become more and more important in our state. And a good example of that is our growing tech sector on the Silicon Slopes. We should be trying to facilitate that with digital broadband and also make sure that people can do teleworking from other more remote areas of the state to try to push some of the congestion in Lehigh and Draper and here in Salt Lake City further out to spread opportunities around the state. I also believe that we've got to take a closer look at the ways that we're making sure that everyone benefits from the economic growth that we have in our state. You know, we've done pretty well at making sure that our unemployment rate is low, but for too many Utahns, those jobs are just that, jobs. They're not careers that include health insurance benefits. We're in the bottom half to third of states for health insurance coverage across the state, and our minimum wage is still at $7.25 an hour. There are some workers at the bottom end of the economic ladder that are barely getting compensated at all. We need to do better to take care of them. We need to make sure that we're keeping health insurance and healthcare affordable. We should be helping to sponsor good paying jobs, not just jobs, but good paying jobs. And one way we can do that is by supporting organized labor, and our unions need to make a comeback to try to advocate on behalf of workers. And then last, we also need to make sure that we're dealing with the various tricks and traps in our marketplace. One I'll mention in particular are those payday loan companies that charge average interest rates in our state of over 500%. A poll that I looked at showed that a supermajority of Utahns, both Republicans and Democrats, are ready for payday loan reform. Unlike the current administration, which has had decades to try to do something about this problem that actually makes a difference, I'll fight for ordinary Utahns across the state to make sure that they get a fair deal and that their interests are represented, not just party elites, privileged insiders, and lobbyists.
Well, several of those issues are going to require a pretty good relationship with our Utah state legislatures. It's going to require some changes in statutes. Your thoughts about how you're going to be able to work with them to move a couple of these points along?
Great question. I'm going to work bipartisanly. And what you can expect from me is competence, civility, honor, honesty, and hard work. And I'm going to try to persuade, negotiate, charm, and do everything I can to work with the state legislature in the collegial way that Utahns expect. We're going to have to work as a team to make progress. You know, it hasn't always been that we've had such poisonous partisanship in our society, and Utah can be a real leader on that front. If you go back a few years, Utah had some great Democratic governors, Scott Matheson Sr., Cal Rampton, and then even further in our history, after the Great Depression, we had a whole string of Democratic governors going back to the earliest years of the state of Utah. And I think that that balance is appropriate. It's not such a bad idea, not only for Democrats, but for Republicans to have a reasonable moderate in the governor's office to try to help nudge the state legislature to representing the public a bit more directly. I'll just give you one last example. You know, we had 3 ballot measures in this state in the last election on Medicaid expansion, abortion, medical marijuana under the supervision of a physician, and also fair legislative redistricting. On all three of those issues, the public voted for the ballot measure, which is more synonymous with the Democratic line of politics than it is with the Republican line. And yet the state legislature seemed to think that they knew better and watered down, repealed and replaced all three of those ballot measures. I won't do that. I'll listen to the public and I'll work with the public to try to protect those ballot measures in my negotiations with the state legislature.
Okay. One of the items that you have mentioned that will be connected to that and to some measures that I want to talk about in just a moment is how the state approaches education. The funding of this is an issue that comes up every single legislative session for as long as I've been involved in the political process. What do you, as governor, think the right approach is to find the right funding level or the most appropriate funding level?
Well, first off, I believe in public education. You know, when I was growing up as a kid, I'm entirely a product of Utah public schools. Went to public schools out in West Valley City. I think that teachers that chance to succeed. And the challenge we are last in purple ending, loaded and upstate in America. I know that we've got some big family sizes in our state, and that's okay. I see that, but we can't leave children behind. So how can we get more revenue? Two strategies. First off, we need to be as careful in auditing and keeping track of the various tax incentives, tax credits, and tax loopholes as we are with our expenditures. Both of them affect the bottom line in the same way, and our tax incentives need to reflect our values. Every time we give an incentive or a tax cut for a wealthy individual or a big business, we need to make sure that that is dollar for dollar where our values are vis-a-vis our public school funding. And that's not, I believe in tax incentives. It's an appropriate tool for policy, but we need to make sure that our values are there. And then second, I do not support the flat income tax that we adopted in this state several years back. I believe it was one of the biggest mistakes that we've made for public education funding. So everyone hopefully knows that income taxes under our state constitution are earmarked for education. And we passed back during the Huntsman administration a flat income tax that means that a single mom with 3 kids who's just barely getting by pays the same income tax rate as a multimillionaire who's making millions of dollars a year. That's not the way that we've historically done it in the distant past in our state. To whom much is given, a little bit more should be expected. And that's not some wild-eyed notion, a liberal notion. It's from Isaiah. It's in the Bible, I'm pretty sure. And I believe that that's where most Utahns are. If you look at all the taxes that we generate across income taxes, property taxes, use fees, sales taxes, Utah now has a regressive tax system where low to moderate income Utahns pay more in overall relative value in their taxes than the very most wealthy do. That's immoral from my perspective. And I'll fight to make it go the other direction, and we'll get some more revenue out of that, and we'll do a better job taking care of our kids.
One of the connected issues for that is an amendment that Utahns are going to have a chance to vote on in this next election, and that's Amendment G, which changes, that's exactly some of the pieces you were just talking about, where income tax primarily earmarked for public education. It would expand that a bit to children and people with disabilities. Do you support this constitutional amendment, and explain why or why not?
So first off, I want you and your listeners to know that I care about disabled rights. My mom was disabled. Some of my earliest memories as a kid were pushing my mom around in her wheelchair in the grocery store when I was just a little boy. And we need to do what we can to try to recognize how diversity helps us, including the disabled community. If we take care of the disabled, they give back more to our community than they take, and we need to support them. So I'm not opposed to increasing funding for disability services. But just a little bit more about that constitutional amendment. Part of the deal in that constitutional amendment was that there were going to be some guaranteed increases in public school funding in exchange for support from some folks for that constitutional amendment. But with the coronavirus crisis, we've already seen that funding, that increased funding for public schools is not materializing. So overall, I think that I'm likely to vote against. I'm still trying to make up my mind, but I think I'm still likely to vote against the constitutional amendment because I don't feel like the deal was honored. I want more funding for our kids. Did you know that nearly 1 in 4 fourth graders in our state cannot read at a basic level? We need to get the practical instruction and resources in our schools to make sure that all the kids are getting the opportunities to succeed. And the current administration and the one-party system is not getting the job done. I believe that the constitutional amendment is a step in the wrong direction.
One more point on this before we leave education is to your very great comment about the needs of the students, making sure we address the disparate needs. And it's a little bit like what I asked you before. So the governor of the state of Utah is involved in these educational choices. I'm curious at what point you would feel, maybe it's just like the coronavirus and mask mandates, these school districts are left to make some pretty serious decisions on their own, and they're making them based on circumstances around them. Do you feel like the governor should have a say or push certain requirements or interests in those to make sure that there's some uniformity of approach through the entire state?
Well, let's be clear about two different things. First off, on general curriculum and educational policy, in our system, that's guided by the Board of Education and the local school districts. And I don't think that, generally speaking, the governor, other than perhaps some negotiations with the legislature from time to time, the governor shouldn't micromanage how the day-to-day operation of our schools is taking place. But a special exception for that, if there's a public health emergency or a crisis that's ongoing, and the governor and the Department of Health have special resources that can help keep kids and teachers and staff safe, then I think it's absolutely incumbent on the governor to take action, to lead, and to make sure that we're keeping people safe. You know, my understanding is that there's a public school teacher from Corner Canyon High School who's currently in the intensive care unit. You know, school districts do a lot of great stuff, and our school administrators and teachers, I celebrate their efforts, but they're not public health experts. They don't have training in epidemiology. They're not medical doctors. They need help and support trying to make the right call on how we're going to keep those kids safe. So I believe that the governor's office has not taken sufficient action to try to help those school districts get to the place that they need. Instead, they've left the school districts on their own, and I'm not sure that all the school districts are making the best decisions. And what's more, part of the reason I believe the administration is doing that is then it's the school district officials who have to take the political heat from potentially controversial decisions. I think that the governor needs to step up and lead during an emergency to take care of the health and safety of our teachers, our kids. And it's not just the kids. The kids can get the virus, then take it home and give it to their parents and their grandparents and their neighbors, and it can have a tragic effect all across our communities. We need leadership in the governor's office. I hope that I can provide that, and I hope I can to earn the vote from folks all across the state that are struggling.
I'd like to talk about the growth in the state of Utah for just a moment. Since the Great Recession, fastest growing state in the country, which has lots of corresponding impacts. The one I'd like to ask you about, because it's come up in our focus groups, is the impact on housing, the availability of it, and the price.
Well, I think affordable housing is a real challenge we're facing in the state. We have a lot of people that are moving in, and also we have big families, and we're growing as a state. And our economy has been doing reasonably well for some, not for everyone, and that's putting upward pressure on our housing prices. At the same time, there are a lot of people in the state whose incomes have not been growing. Their incomes have been stagnant, even though many of them are working 1 or 2 or even 3 jobs, and across an entire household, oftentimes 4 or even 5 jobs, and they're still struggling to purchase housing. So what can we do about it? Well, first off, I think that the governor's office needs to work in partnership with local governments to try to make sure that we're increasing the housing stock of affordable housing. We also should be trying to do everything that we can to increase wages. And that includes some of the things we've already talked about, raising the minimum wage, trying to make sure that in union contracts, we're paying a fair wage to union employees. And I think we should should be supporting organized labor. You know, if you look across different countries all across the world, countries that have active and protected organized labor have much better outcomes for overall equality than countries that don't. You know, I'm not saying that unions can do no wrong. Oftentimes they can. Corruption can be a problem, but I believe that the pendulum has swung a bit too far in the anti-union direction. And one of the things that that's doing is leaving too many of our workers behind. I'm going to be supportive of organized labor and try to, because that can be one of the most important solutions to affordable housing. Also, we need to not forget the serious challenge that we're facing with respect to the homeless and the unsheltered in our communities. You know, we had the Rio Grande initiative here in downtown Salt Lake, but what that really did was move the deck chairs on the Titanic to an extent. Now we have a number of different homeless camps growing all across the state, and they have less access to services. One of the tragedies is that right now we've seen that many of our homeless in Salt Lake City don't have a place to use the restroom, and that's creating a health and safety challenge. We need to have more active leadership. I've supported creating a homelessness czar to try to coordinate our response, make sure that we're investing in the most efficient outcomes and getting transition housing to try to do a shelter first approach. And that's not just focused on downtown Salt Lake. Too many of our rural communities in Washington County and Carbon County, all across the state, also have growing homeless populations because they have affordable housing challenges of their own. One last thing I'll mention, we talked about teleworking. That's another strategy to try to deal with affordable housing because the cost of housing is much lower in some of the more outlying areas. You know, right now in Carbon County, it's a lot more inexpensive to buy housing than it is in Lehigh, but people could go and get teleworking jobs in Carbon County if they've got great quality internet, and then once or twice a week, maybe they go into Utah County or up to Salt Lake to meet with their staff. That's a way that we could backfill some needed jobs in Carbon County, Price, Utah, other areas, not just Carbon County, just using that as an example. It would also decrease the housing affordability challenge because the housing is so much cheaper in some of those areas. So those are some strategies that I'll be working towards. Many more things we could talk about, and I'm going to be open to data-driven solutions to do everything that we can to try to take care of working people across the state.
All right, thank you for answering those questions. I'm just going to give you a minute and a half here, Chris, to your final case here. Just why you for governor? All right, this is quite open. Go ahead.
All right. Well, thank you, Jason, and thank you, everybody. It's an honor to get to compete in an election like this. You know, I know that I'm not as well known as my opponent. He was a pretty big fish in maybe a smaller pond out here in Utah, and managed to do some pretty good work on some things. I think not so good work on some other things in state leadership. I worked back in Washington and managed to have some real successes getting results for people all across the country. You know, because of my efforts, it's now illegal to make one of those payday loans to any active duty soldier, sailor, airman, or Marine anywhere in America. And about 10% of the adult population got a refund in one of the cases that my team worked on. I'm a leader that has a track record of results, and I think I'll be a breath of fresh air to bring a little bit of balance to the government. Another thing, I'll never increase food taxes. You know that I'll be on the side of ordinary working people across this state. If you'd like a reasonable moderate who's on your side, that's not going to be governing for the benefit of privileged insiders or party elites, I hope that you'll give me a chance. It's time for change in the state of Utah, and I'm honored to have the opportunity to compete. I hope I'll earn your vote.
Excellent. Thank you very much for being with us, Chris, today. And for those who are watching, that's Democratic candidate for governor for the state of Utah, Chris Peterson. Thank you for being with us.
All right. Thank you so much, Jason. Bye-bye.
All right. And thank you for joining us this afternoon. We are now happy and it's our pleasure to welcome to Informed Decisions 2020, Lieutenant Governor Spencer Cox. Thanks for joining us.
Jason, it's great to be with you. Thank you for your great work. And I wish we were in person, but it's always good to be with the Hinckley Institute.
Yeah, well, me too. One day back in person. Let's jump in, Lieutenant Governor, because first, a lot of people had a chance to get to know you over the past time in your office and even before. But a little bit of an intro to those watching from you, a little about yourself and why you've decided to throw your hat in the ring for this particular job, particularly at this time, which is no easy task.
Well, I think it's important to point out, Jason, that I made this decision before 2020, and it may have been different had we known. No, in all seriousness, it's an honor to have the opportunity to be the nominee for the Republican Party here in the state of Utah. For those of you that don't know me, I'm born and raised in the small town of Fairview in Sanpete County, on the farm that my great-great-great-grandfather settled over 150 years ago. I went to Snow College and then to Utah State University. Somewhere in there, I married my high school sweetheart, Abby, who grew up in Mount Pleasant, and then went to law school back in Virginia. Came back to work for a big law firm in Salt Lake, and then got an opportunity to go back home and raise my kids on the farm, run a telecommunications company while I was there, and through happenstance got involved as a city council member, replacing somebody who had moved. Got a chance to serve as the mayor and then county commissioner in Sanpete County. Got elected to the House of Representatives when out of nowhere Governor Herbert asked me to serve as his lieutenant governor. That first conversation was 7 years ago this week, and ultimately said yes. I still live in Sanpete with my wife and my 4 kids, and I've been commuting back and forth to the Capitol for the past 7 years. And then the governor asked me over a year ago, he asked me to consider running for governor. It's something we hadn't thought that much about, but after a long discussion with my family, decided that this is what we needed to do and what we were supposed to do. And the reason is very simple. I have had this unique opportunity to serve at basically every level of government, in the private sector as well, and really learned what it takes to make our state successful. And I get to travel to all 29 counties every year. I visited all 248 cities and towns. I've been able to meet the people of Utah, and I believe have a unique skill set, and again, a unique understanding into where we are as a state and where we can go. I'm very proud of the successes that we've had over the past 7 years, but our best days lie ahead, and I'm excited to talk about some of those ideas and some of the issues with you today.
I want to get into some of those, but I hope you don't mind this, because I was contacted right before a question from an audience member for you already. And it was this: they know you travel back and forth to beautiful Fairview. What do you do on that drive? That was the question.
It's a very good question. Now, very safely, using Bluetooth technology, I have the opportunity to have several phone conversations. My staff is very good at scheduling those in the morning, at night, so I can do some work as I'm traveling. But I have 20 minutes with no cell service, which is the best part of my day, the part where I get left alone with my thoughts. I do have a lot of books on tape, a lot of Audible. I've been doing a biography on every president, and then I also have a lot of podcasts that I listen to. So it's a way for me to keep updated, keep reading, and keep in touch with people.
All right, the inquiring minds now know. Thank you for that. I got to get through all those biographies myself. I want to jump into some questions, Lieutenant Governor. Working with the Gardner Policy Institute, we asked Utahns what they think the most important issues are, and I want to go through some of those questions today. I want to start with the one that is having an impact on every single one of us. Let's start with COVID-19 and the state's response. You've been in a very important position there as you've helped lead the state's response. What do you think the most appropriate role for a governor is in this kind of situation?
Well, thank you, Jason. It wouldn't be 2020 without talking about the coronavirus. I can't wait until we get to have a forum or a town hall where we don't talk about it. But of course, it is the most important issue that we are facing today. And the role of the chief executive is there are multiple roles, actually. First and foremost, the role of the chief executive is to keep people informed. Unfortunately, we live in a time, in an era, really the first time in the history of our nation where it's hard to know what is real, what is not real. There's so much disinformation, misinformation. Of course, with social media, it allows us to surround ourselves with those voices that only say the things that we want to hear, and confirmation bias is a real problem. And so one of the roles that the governor faces is to keep people informed. And of course, Governor Herbert is working very hard to do that, having weekly and sometimes more often press conferences to give give people the best information possible. The second role is to work very closely with experts from across the state to make decisions that are critical to the welfare and safety of the people of our state. And look, every governor is trying to thread a needle right now. It's the smallest needle possible, and it's a needle that keeps moving. And that needle is, how do you keep people healthy and safe while also not destroying the economy and the jobs that people need for their families? And by the way, there are other consequences, health related even, from a pandemic like this. Of course, mental health being the biggest, but there are others as well, as people are foregoing needed medical attention because they're worried about potentially getting the virus at the hospital or at their doctor's office. And so working with those professionals, those healthcare professionals, to make the right decisions. But the governor isn't a dictator. The governor does not, of course, early on, and we have laws in place for this, the governor can execute orders that bypass the legislature to make these important decisions on a moment's notice when you have to act very quickly. However, that is unsustainable over a long period of time. And so what you see is now, and this is the third part of this, it's bringing people together to help make those decisions. And that includes the legislature, legislative leadership. It includes local authorities. It includes our school authorities. One of the unique things about our nation and the way we distribute power is that local authorities, local health departments, mayors, county commissioners, local school boards play a very important and critical role in making the decisions that are important for the citizens that live in their jurisdiction. And so it is a balancing act in bringing all of those people together, finding consensus and making the right decisions.
Well, that is a difficult balancing act, and it's one of those needles that you have to thread. I'm kind of curious about what you've had to do so far on that, in particular, maybe just the case in point, just what's happened in Utah County over the past week, where there's a decision to move the risk assessment level, but also on that mask mandate. So when you start empowering those local leaders, at what point does the governor get in and apply the pressure based on the overall view of the entire state, when those local elected officials sometimes just doing the best they can, but maybe they need some help?
Yeah, no, it's a really important question. And again, I think you gave an example of what we were able to see this week. Of course, we are seeing a surge in cases right now, which is very troubling and very problematic. And we've seen these surges. Every state has had surges. Every nation has had surges. We're seeing it in Europe right now, where they are surging again. And what we know about this surge in particular is that it's being driven by college towns. If you look at the nation right now, you look at every county, those counties that are college counties, where you have lots of students coming back, are seeing surges and increases. And of course, Utah County, we have the two largest institutions in BYU and UVU that are driving this surge. Now, there's some good news baked into that, and that is that what we know about the demographics of this disease is that the younger people are impacted less. And so if there was a way to only have college kids get this disease, to keep it contained there, then that wouldn't be the worst thing in the world. It wouldn't be great, but it wouldn't be the worst thing. However, unfortunately, what we do know is that eventually young people interact with older people. And that's why there is such a concern. And we're starting to see those hospitalization numbers tick up, unsurprisingly, because of this surge. And so what we do is, again, we sit down with people like Dr. Angela Dunn, our state health department, and we have these very intense discussions about their recommendation. And the recommendation here was that we be as surgical as possible. And so then we start to bring in a local government, and we have those conversations as well. Now, the governor has been very clear that on the mask mandate side, he wants to leave that to the local officials to make that decision. But he was able to apply pressure in that case by saying he thinks it's a good idea, highly recommends it, roll back Provo and Orem to orange. And if it continues, we may have to look at rolling back the entire county, which then gives some incentive to make the right decisions and try to lower these. And so this type of leadership has been very effective on lots of issues in the past, and I'm grateful to see the county commission in Utah County step up last night and issue a mask order, and everybody is working together, including college presidents who put out a very sternly worded statement yesterday and have started imposing infractions on those students who are unwilling to abide by the health care regulations, and that's going to make a difference over time.
Before we leave that then, so do I take it you agree with this approach? You leave the mask mandate decisions to locals as opposed to from a statewide level?
Well, I am still the lieutenant governor, and I have no choice but to agree with the actions of the governor.
I guess
And,
that's
and look, there is wisdom in that. As I say, in Sanpete County, we've been socially distancing for 160 years, and so it certainly is different in different parts of the state, and we can work closely together to make the right decisions together.
All right, excellent. If you don't mind, this is a related question to it to COVID-19 because they're connected. When we surveyed Utahns, asking them what the two key issues for their decision to vote on governor, number one by a large margin was the economy, and connected to that was the response to COVID-19. And those two things certainly are connected. Your thoughts and your approach that you will take to not only just help our economy to recover, but then to thrive after.
Yeah, and this is the big issue. So I actually was on a call this morning with Governor Charlie Baker in Massachusetts and Governor Tate Reeves down in Mississippi, friends who are working through these very same issues. And this is the mistake that so many made. Again, we're politicizing everything, which is a huge mistake. But it seems like today you either have to be team health or team economy, and that's just a huge problem. And it's not true. It's a false choice. Of course, if we get the health side right, the economy will improve. At the same time, we certainly can't ignore the economy. And again, Utahns, we just have so many talented entrepreneurs in this state. If you look over the last 10 years, we're the fastest growing state from a population standpoint, but we also have the best performing economy, the largest increase in GDP of any state over the last 10 years. In February, we had the lowest unemployment in our state's history at 2.3%. And then, of course, in March, we're slammed with the coronavirus. But I'm very proud of the economic response of Utahns across the state. Right now, we are at 4.1% unemployment. Economists told us that would be impossible by this stage, and that's the second lowest. We were the lowest last month, but Nebraska passed us by just a fraction of a percentage. And so we are absolutely trending in the right direction. But more importantly, and this is inherent in the question that you asked, it's not just about getting back to where we were. It's about using what we've learned through this pandemic to improve to a better place. There are a couple things that I think are really important. And Utah is the best positioned state. That's just not me talking, me being a cheerleader. Forbes magazine has said this. The White House has said this. Harvard has said this. That Utah is one of the best positioned states coming out of this pandemic to go to an even better place. I'll just give you one example. One of the biggest problems during this pandemic is that supply chains have been disrupted in ways that we have not seen in our lifetimes. And with that comes a unique opportunity. We are seeing manufacturing come back to the United States in very big ways. And again, Utah is incredibly well situated for this. We have land, we have people, in rural Utah especially, we have cheap power, all of the things that manufacturers are looking for. And that means that we are going to recover to a better place than before. Telework is another one. I started on a telework initiative a year before the pandemic hit. My goal was to have, by the end of this year, 2,500 state employees teleworking. This helps in so many ways. First of all, it gives us jobs in rural Utah that don't exist right now, as they can apply for jobs that you used to only could find on the Wasatch Front. It takes cars off of the road, which is improving our air quality, which is a huge deal to make sure that we can have sustainable growth here in our state. Turns out that if you do this the right way, and we had experts who helped advise us on this, that employees are actually happier. We measured their mental health over time, and they were much happier than their colleagues at work. They didn't have to have those long commutes like I have, and so it's just a win all the way around. We were hoping to have 2,500 by the end of this year. We have far surpassed 2,500 because of the coronavirus, and we know that many of those will continue. The best part, we will save taxpayers hundreds of millions of dollars in savings in not building new buildings and some of the other expenses that come from working in a large building. So those are just a few of the ways that our economy is going to come back better and stronger than it was before.
Okay. Well, the beneficiary of that stronger economy is public education, many other things too, but I want to talk about that one for a moment, Lieutenant Governor. What is the right approach in your mind to approach funding for public ed and the kind of metrics that you'll be looking at to see how you're moving the needle?
Sure. So this has been a large focus of the Herbert Cox administration. If you look at our budgets every year, we've been able to provide record numbers of increases in funding for education over the past 5 years, something that we're very proud of. Now, that being said, we still have a long ways to go. We have some unique challenges here in the state of Utah. And really, there are two challenges. One is that we're really good at having kids, and that's a great problem to have. We love that. I have 4 kids of my own, all go to public school at North Sanpete High School and North Sanpete Middle School, Fairview Elementary, and so that's a challenge. But it's compounded because of the way that our nation funds education. In most states, and including Utah, property tax is a really big piece of the way that we fund education. Now, unfortunately, about 70% of our state is owned by the federal government, and they pay they don't pay the normal tax rate on those lands. Of course, they have payment in lieu of taxes, which we affectionately refer to as pennies in lieu of trillions. And so we are at a disadvantage with those two things that no other state really focuses. The largest population of school-age children in the country, and one of the smallest percentages of lands where taxes are actually paid. And so that creates this challenge that we have moving forward, which has led to things like a teacher shortage. And part of that teacher shortage, one of the big reasons, is that we're simply not paying our teachers enough. Although, as Wallet Hub came out yesterday with a study that showed that Utah actually is in the top 15 in increasing teacher salaries over the past 10 years, and we're top 10 in salary outlook moving forward, which is great news for our teachers. They actually found that we were the second best place in the nation for teachers, despite these challenges that we're working on. And so we still have a long ways to go there. And as part of my administration, if it wasn't for the pandemic, all you would have heard about in our campaign was the work we were going to do to increase funding, increase teacher salaries. And then there's another piece of this that I'm just so passionate about. Our ads are just launching this week, where you will hear more of this, but equity funding is critical to me. We have some schools that are incredibly well funded, that are doing very, very well because they live in areas where there is a very high tax base. So you think of Park City, for example, the East Bench in Salt Lake, and other areas like that, where just a few miles away, we have schools on the west side and in rural Utah, Title I schools, where we don't have the same level of funding, and not even close to what they're receiving in those schools. Now, the state is equitable in their funding, but it's the local level where things are different. And if we truly want to lift those who are struggling, those who are most at risk, I think everyone, Republican or Democrat, we all believe that it's better to teach a person to fish than to give them a fish. But that only works if we are providing an excellent education. And by the way, the Constitution of the state of Utah requires that everyone get an excellent education, regardless of your zip code. And that's something we have to address, and we will in a Cox-Anderson administration.
I need to follow that thread for just a moment, Lieutenant Governor, because this tax policy is something that gets discussed a lot. And to your point about what the Constitution requires, of course, this income tax right now is dedicated to public education. Your thoughts about Amendment G, which expands the use of that income tax, children, people with disabilities?
Well, initially I was opposed to Amendment G because of that, the constitutional guarantee that we have that we use income tax for education. However, as you know, because you worked in state government for a time, you know that hasn't necessarily been followed. The legislature has been able to play a little bit of a shell game in that several years ago we amended the Constitution to allow higher education to be included in that income tax fund, that education fund. And so every year when we needed more money for roads or other things, we would move higher ed from the general fund into the education fund, and that would free up money. And so there has been this siphoning off over time. And so really what we're doing here, and this is important, this is why I am supporting Amendment G. We sat down and worked very closely with the education community, with the UEA and other together education leaders, superintendents, teachers organizations, the PTA, and others to help understand, because we had this balancing issue, and we got buy-in from all of those communities with promises that we would increase education, and those promises need to be upheld. And as governor, I will make sure that the legislature does that. Now, we find ourselves in a very difficult budgeting time because of the coronavirus and what's happening to our economy. We've seen decreases, but here's what's important. I think we were the only state. We had a special session, and we were able to maintain all of the past funding for education going back, and actually increase 2% education funding for the year to come. Doing that during this pandemic is remarkable, and it shows the commitment that the legislature and the governor's office has to education. But that doesn't mean we forget about the promise that we made. As the economy improves and as we have new dollars that we can spend, those dollars have to be prioritized to education so that we can keep that promise and make sure that those who are agreeing to support this constitutional amendment get their just rewards.
Okay, thanks for that. I'd like to jump into the impacts relating to growth in our state. And as you know, since the Great Depression, this is the fastest growing state in the country. And we also have a lot of people moving in and children coming up, which is creating some issues in terms of growth. The one I'm particularly interested in right now is housing, the housing shortage that we seem to have, and the affordability of housing. Your thoughts about that and what you will do to approach those two issues.
Sure. So you're absolutely right. We are the fastest growing state over the last 10 years, and that brings some challenges. I think it's important to note why we're growing so fast. So of course, we mentioned our kids already. We've always been almost always been number 1 or 2 when it comes to birth rate. That's actually falling off a little bit. It may surprise people. I think we were 4th last year in my conversations with the Gardner Institute, and so that's changing a little bit. But what's offsetting that is that people have discovered Utah and they're moving here. And there are many reasons for that. Of course, we have just these iconic landscapes. It's a beautiful place to live and to recreate and to raise a family, but also because our economy is doing so well, and that is attracting people. Of course, Silicon Slopes most famously, but we're also in the most diverse economy in the country over the past few years, which is a really big deal. And so that's all good news, but it does lead to these growth challenges, especially along the Wasatch Front, but we're certainly seeing them in other places. And so there's a couple things that we need to do. One is we have to continue to work with our local municipalities. Look, governors do not make those decisions, and they should not make those decisions when it comes to local zoning. That's not what we do. I'm a former mayor, former city councilman. I understand how important it is. People make better decisions when authority is close to them, and that's just the way it works. And I truly believe that. However, the state does play a role, and our role is around infrastructure. Now, having more people and having density isn't inherently bad. We sometimes kind of recoil because we've seen what happens when growth is bad, but not all growth is bad if you maintain infrastructure. And I've said this countless times, but there's just an easy formula that I follow, and that is when infrastructure precedes density and growth, the quality of life stays high. However, when density and growth precede infrastructure, the quality of life goes down, whether that's housing, the price of housing, traffic concerns, air quality, all of those things. And so we are investing in infrastructure, but we have to continue to do that. Mass transit is a great example of that. And so when we work with those municipalities to add density in areas where we do have mass transit, and not where we don't have east-west corridors, right? That just makes the matter worse. Then we can improve people's quality of life and give people additional opportunities. Second, we have to improve economic opportunity in rural Utah. I've already mentioned telework. I come from that world. I also ran a telecommunications company, a fiber optic company, where what we did was deliver high-speed internet into rural Utah. Most people would be surprised to know that rural Utah is one of the tops in the nation when it comes to rural broadband, the speeds and the pricing. There are many places in rural Utah where you can get higher speeds at a cheaper price than right here in downtown Salt Lake City, which is remarkable. We are expanding that. We have major fiber projects, not my old company that I used to work for, but the state and other companies have major projects happening right now in San Juan County, getting down to the reservation, which will be a game changer for the Navajos there, and Daggett County, our smallest county up in the corner, really struggling in places like Dutch John and Manila, getting fiber and high-speed internet there to those places. And so I believe this is one of the silver linings coming out of this pandemic, that people will be able to work wherever they want to live, and that will help rural Utah, which will help take some of the pressure off of the growth that we're seeing on the Wasatch Front, and in turn lower the cost of housing. And finally, this, when it comes to housing, there are really three areas that we need to focus on, and that is, of course, housing stock and making sure that we're seeing increases. And I'm talking to our builders right now, and they are building as fast as they possibly can. Construction has been very good through this pandemic and is going to continue. But we need to see innovation in the way we construct buildings, and that's happening. Ivory Homes and some others are really leading out on that here in our state. So that innovation in the cost of construction is the second one. And then finally, the way we fund housing, and especially affordable housing. We've made some big strides in our state over the last couple of years, working with the legislature to find more affordable housing here in our state. And some of the funding, again, because of the coronavirus, unfortunately, we didn't get all the funding that we were hoping for this year, but that will be a top priority moving forward, so that low income housing is available for people in these areas where we are seeing record-breaking prices.
Mm-hmm. You mentioned working with the legislature on this important issue and the others. Tell us your approach. How do you see yourself working with these legislative leaders, keeping that very important seat at that table to make these big decisions for the state?
Well, this is one of the things I'm actually most excited about. As a former legislator myself, it's one of the reasons I chose Senator Deidre Henderson. For those watching out there, if you don't know her, you need to get to know her. I say all the time, she'll be the best lieutenant governor our state has ever had, and I truly mean that. She's served 8 years in the Senate. I have a wonderful relationship with legislative leadership and legislators across the state. And I believe this is a mistake we make, this idea. We always say, well, there's always a tension between the executive branch and the legislative branch. And that is true. That's by design. And that's not a bad thing. But it doesn't mean there always has to be tension between the executive branch and the legislative branch. We have roles to play, constitutional roles to play, that are absolutely important. That being said, we are all on the same team, and we are all trying to solve these problems together. And I truly believe that by constant communication, working together, figuring out the priorities of legislators that are important to them, helping them understand the priorities that matter in the executive branch, that we can work closely together to make a difference in the lives of Utahns. And that's the best part of all. If you look at what's happening at the national level, I often refer to it as a dumpster fire, which isn't really fair to dumpster fires. It's such a mess. Congress is gridlocked. They rarely accomplish anything big. There is no bipartisanship happening at all. People are always surprised to learn that about 90% of the bills in this state pass almost unanimously or unanimously. Democrats often run big pieces of legislation with support from Republicans. We can do big things. We can do that here in Utah if we're willing to work together. And I can't wait to work closely with the legislature.
Yeah. Okay, just in closing, Lieutenant Governor, I'd like to give you a minute and a half. Your final closing here, just making your case in whatever wide open way you'd like.
Well, thank you again, Jason, for this opportunity to spend time with you. I've said many times that the worst of times brings out the best of people here in the state of Utah. We've seen that. We've talked a lot about the pandemic today, but 2020 has been one for the history books, and one we will never forget, and mostly for all the wrong reasons. Let's not forget we had an earthquake back in March. Of course, we've had protests and civil unrest in our capital city, and we just on top of all of it, we had a hurricane. Just a few days ago, something that we don't see here in the state of Utah. And through it all, I've seen the best of Utahns as we have come together to help our neighbors, to lift one another, and to find ways, innovative ways to solve new problems and old problems alike. I am very bullish on our future. I still believe that our best days are ahead. It's been an honor to serve as your Lieutenant Governor over the past 7 years, and I look forward to the next 4 years when we will be able to work together to show the rest of the nation that there is a better way to do things. I'll end with this. Getting through the primary election was very difficult. We had incredible competitors and wonderful public servants that were running there. Through it all, we made a promise that we would run a positive campaign. We kept that promise. It was hard at times, but we knew it was important. And that's the best of Utah. We should expect more of our public officials. We should expect more of those running for office, and we should show Washington, D.C. that you can run an election without tearing people down. You can actually work together to solve problems, and that's what we're going to do in a Cox-Henderson administration.
Excellent. Thank you, Lieutenant Governor. Appreciate you being on the program today. And we appreciate our viewers watching with us today. This is Republican candidate for governor, Lieutenant Governor Spencer Cox. Thank you for being with us.
Thanks, Jason.
And to those viewing, stay connected, get engaged, make sure you vote. Now you know more. Hope it works out as you make bigger decisions today on these two very important candidates for governor. Thank you.